German tank crews, battle-hardened from years of conflict on the Russian steppes and the fields of France, considered themselves nearly invulnerable within the steel confines of their panzers. They had encountered Soviet anti-tank rifles that harmlessly ricocheted off their sloped armor, and they had become accustomed to dismissing enemy artillery unless it struck directly. However, upon their first encounter with the American bazooka, they faced an unexpected challenge. To the German perspective, the weapon appeared crude and almost comically simplistic, resembling a long, unwieldy tube carried on the shoulder of a single infantryman. Many officers dismissed it as mere propaganda or an ineffective curiosity on the battlefield. Yet when that tube unleashed its first shaped charge rocket, the illusion of safety within a panzer was irrevocably shattered. Reports from the Italian front reached German headquarters in late 1943, detailing sudden tank losses attributed to what seemed to be small groups of American soldiers concealed in rubble and mountain passes. Some of the initial captured bazookas were examined by German engineers, who swiftly recognized the threat posed by a portable weapon capable of penetrating armor with a shaped explosive jet. Initially, German propaganda attempted to minimize the weapon's significance, labeling it as clumsy and inaccurate. Nevertheless, tank crews began to whisper anxiously about this new danger. They had been trained to scan the horizon for enemy tanks and artillery. Now, however, a solitary soldier hidden in a ditch or doorway could obliterate their machine with a single rocket. The impact was immediate and disconcerting. In Normandy, the hedgerow country provided ideal cover for bazooka teams. German crews, accustomed to maneuvering across open terrain, suddenly found themselves exposed from all directions. Infantry squads equipped with bazookas could emerge at close range, fire, and then disappear. German commanders observed that even when a bazooka failed to penetrate completely, the jarring thud and explosion against the armor unsettled the crews inside, undermining their confidence. Veterans later recounted how even a single missed shot filled the crew compartment with a sense of dread. The fear that the next rocket might strike just right and transform their panzer into a blazing coffin. This anxiety spread rapidly. Tank crews began to hesitate before advancing into towns, aware that bazookas could be hidden around every corner. German infantry expressed their concerns that armored support had become overly cautious, no longer charging forward with the same fervor. Soldiers who once thought their armor rendered them invulnerable now understood they were being pursued by unseen, silent hunters. Commanders issued new directives to avoid narrow streets, to position infantry screens in front of tanks, and to preserve their vehicles for larger, more significant battles. However, the damage to morale had already commenced. The bazooka was not just a weapon of metal and explosives. It served as a psychological weapon that undermined confidence as effectively as it penetrated armor. Captured German diaries from that time reveal a blend of disbelief and admiration. One panzer gunner described the first occasion his tank was hit. It felt like being struck by thunder itself. We saw no gun, no tank, no artillery, just a sudden explosion that jolted us. The machine that had carried us through Russia was incapacitated by a man with a pipe on his shoulder. For men who had taken pride in their technological superiority, the humiliation was profound. To be brought low, not by another formidable tank, but by a concealed infantryman, was nearly unimaginable. Yet across the front, an increasing number of panzers were rendered inoperable by this peculiar new American invention, compelling German crews to acknowledge that their era of dominance was dwindling. The summer of 1944 transformed the fields and hedgerows of Normandy into a graveyard for German armor. The Bocahague region presented a type of terrain that German crews had never encountered before. Instead of expansive fields that permitted tanks to maneuver and detect threats from afar, the landscape was a stifling labyrinth of earthen walls, dense hedges, and sunken lanes. For American infantry, this was an ideal hunting ground. For the German panzer crews, it was a harrowing experience. The bazooka, which had already demonstrated its effectiveness in Italy, found its most lethal application within these constricted green confines. Each hedge harbored potential threats. A panzer cautiously navigating a narrow path was acutely aware that at any moment a burst of fire could erupt from behind dense foliage. Bazooka teams, typically consisting of pairs of infantrymen, would remain silent until the tank's side or rear became vulnerable, then launch a rocket from nearly point-blank range. For the crew inside, there was no forewarning, only the abrupt sound of impact, the thunderous explosion, and the acrid scent of burning paint and fuel. Survivors recounted the feeling of powerlessness, ensnared in a steel coffin with no room to maneuver and no opportunity to retaliate against an unseen enemy. Tank commanders attempted to adjust their strategies by deploying infantry screens in front of their vehicles. However, American squads exhibited patience, maneuvering past these protective forces and striking when the Panzer's supporting infantry had lagged behind. The WWII transformed every village and intersection into a potential ambush site. German soldiers expressed their frustration over the impossibility of advancing without incurring tank losses to unseen adversaries. Even when they managed to survive, the repercussions were enduring. One lieutenant recalled his crews developing a sense of paranoia. Every hedge they passed, every dilapidated barn appeared to conceal another rocket. We began to perceive phantoms armed with bazookas in every shadow. The impact on morale was catastrophic. German tank units, once accustomed to spearheading assaults and breaking through enemy lines with sheer force and firepower, now found their commanders reluctant to deploy armor without meticulous reconnaissance. The once dreaded panzers advanced at a sluggish pace, apprehensive of what might be lurking behind the next hedge. This indecision instilled confidence in American troops. Infantry squads discovered that with bravery and a few bazookas, they could maintain their position against machines that had previously epitomized fear. The cumulative losses were staggering. Panzers were not easily replaceable, and each vehicle that was destroyed or abandoned weakened the German defense. Reports sent to Berlin indicated unexpected losses and the alarming effectiveness of the American rocket launcher. However, within the ranks, rumors spread more quickly than official communications. Veterans who had fought on the Eastern Front noted that not even the feared Soviet anti-tank rifles caused such anxiety. The bazooka's portability, its sudden appearance at close range, and its ability to destroy even medium tanks made it a threat disproportionate to its size. What troubled German crews the most was the unpredictability. A tank could withstand artillery barrages and engage in duels with Shermans, only to be taken out by two concealed men wielding a tube. There was no honor in such a demise, no clash of steel against steel. It felt dishonorable, even humiliating, to be hunted like prey. Diaries and letters revealed a growing sense of bitterness. Some tankers referred to the Bauge as a slaughterhouse for armor. Others described Normandy as a battleground where the very earth fought against us. For the Panzer crews, the WWII campaign marked the moment they began to fear not only American tanks, but also the creativity and determination of American infantry armed with their bazookas. By the late months of 1944, German tank crews began to encounter not just infantry wielding bazookas, but an entire class of American vehicles designed specifically for the purpose of hunting and destroying tanks. These were the tank destroyers, machines that had lighter armor than Shermans, but were equipped with powerful guns capable of taking out even the dreaded Panther and Tiger tanks. The concept was initially alien to German officers. In their military doctrine, tanks were intended to engage other tanks. However, the Americans had invested in vehicles such as the M10 Wolverine, the M18 Hellcat, and the M36 Jackson, which prioritized speed and mobility over armor. For German panzer crews accustomed to engaging in direct confrontations, these hunters posed a novel type of threat, one that seemed to emerge unexpectedly on the battlefield and strike with lethal accuracy. The initial encounters with the M10 Wolverine caught many Germans by surprise. Its 76mm gun possessed the range and penetration capability to breach their armor, even from angles where they previously felt secure. Crews reported being astonished by the sheer volume of fire these vehicles could unleash, maneuvering into position and firing before German tanks had the opportunity to respond. The M18 Hellcat, with its remarkable speed, became even more dreaded. It could swiftly traverse open terrain, outmaneuver heavier German tanks, and then deliver devastating strikes to their vulnerable side or rear armor. Survivors of such confrontations described the Hellcat as a specter appearing in places where it should not have been possible, firing and then disappearing before German guns could retaliate. Most astonishing of all was the introduction of the M36 Jackson, which was equipped with a 90mm gun. To Panzer crews, this weapon appeared almost unjust. Reports indicate that the Jackson was capable of penetrating the thick frontal armor of Tigers, a feat that few other Allied weapons had achieved consistently. German veterans would later concede that upon realizing such vehicles were present on the battlefield, their sense of superiority diminished. They had always believed that their heavy tanks provided them with an advantage over the Allies. However, this was evidence that the Americans could deploy weapons that not only matched, but surpassed German firepower. The tank destroyer battalions themselves were exceptionally mobile, repositioning across the front to fill gaps or initiate ambushes. German officers lamented that wherever they attempted concentrated armored assaults, American tank destroyers were already in place. Coupled with bazooka teams, these units rendered every advance costly. German crews began to fear the reports of new American anti-tank battalions advancing into their area. It was not merely the material losses that were painful. The sensation of being pursued was palpable, as they came to the realization that their tanks, once regarded as emblems of invulnerability, had transformed into targets in a game of chess orchestrated by others. The Americans exhibited a level of adaptability that the Germans found challenging to counter. Crews of tank destroyers were trained to collaborate with infantry, reconnaissance units, and artillery, establishing traps that lured German tanks into kill zones. A Panther, confidently advancing across a field, could unexpectedly find itself surrounded by Hellcats, moving at astonishing speeds. Veterans recounted the feeling of helplessness as they witnessed shells penetrate their armor effortlessly. The shock of understanding that their panzers could be annihilated from a distance before they even had the opportunity to fire. What eroded German morale the most was the increasing awareness that their technological superiority was diminishing. They had built their reputation on the illusion of superior machinery, the panzers that had overrun Poland, France, and much of Russia. However, on the battlefields of Western Europe, American innovation and mass production had birthed specialized destroyers that dismantled that myth piece by piece. The emergence of tank destroyers indicated not merely a tactical shift, but a significant decline in confidence. German crews began to question whether each advance would culminate not in triumph, but in fiery obliteration at the hands of these swift American hunters. The most profound shock to German tank crews did not stem solely from the bazookas or the tank destroyers, but from the manner in which the Americans integrated them with the standard Sherman tanks. On its own, the Sherman was not particularly fearsome to the men inside the panzers. German crews frequently derided its flimsy armor and its propensity to ignite upon impact. They referred to it as the Tommy Cooker or Ronson after the cigarette lighter, convinced that it could never stand up to a Panther or Tiger in a direct confrontation. Yet what truly unsettled them was not the individual vehicle, but the strategic way American forces deployed Shermans in conjunction with their specialized tank destroyers. In combat, Shermans advanced in significant numbers, compelling German tanks to disclose their locations. Although the Shermans did not always prevail in these encounters, they were capable of absorbing losses, executing aggressive maneuvers, and keeping German gunners engaged. While the panzer crews were focused on the advancing columns, American tank destroyers would strike from the sides. The Hellcats and Jacksons utilized their speed to maneuver behind German lines, targeting vulnerabilities with lethal precision. This tactical execution of battle was unprecedented for the Germans. Rather than a straightforward confrontation of tank versus tank, it evolved into a coordinated ambush where the Shermans served as bait and the tank destroyers acted as executioners. German reports recounted the bewilderment and distress experienced when facing this strategy for the first time. Tank commanders, who were confident in their superior optics and gun range, suddenly found themselves encircled. Their heavy armor, designed for head-on confrontations, provided minimal protection when shells impacted their sides or rear. One Panther commander later confessed that his crew managed to destroy 3 Shermans in quick succession, only to be annihilated moments later by a Hellcat that emerged from an unforeseen direction. The understanding that American tactics intentionally sacrificed less robust tanks to orchestrate deadly ambushes astonished veterans who were used to preserving every valuable machine. Compounding the situation was the overwhelming scale of American production. Shermans appeared to be inexhaustible, rolling across the fields in quantities that overshadowed German reserves. Even if a crew managed to destroy 5 or 6 in a single engagement, there were always more on the horizon. And lurking behind those expendable Shermans were the true threats: the tank destroyers, which the Germans increasingly came to dread as much as any Soviet T-34. The psychological impact was profound. Crews began to realize that no matter how many enemy tanks they eliminated, victory was unattainable. For every Panzer lost, there were insufficient replacements. For every Sherman that was destroyed, another one would take its place, frequently accompanied by the sharp sound of a 90mm gun from a Jackson. The issue was exacerbated by infantry coordination. American squads equipped with bazookas trailed the armored units, targeting German tanks that succeeded in breaching the initial waves. A Panzer that managed to survive encounters with Shermans and evade tank destroyers could still be rendered ineffective by a concealed rocket team positioned at a crossroads. This multi-layered anti-tank defense system established a battlefield devoid of any secure route forward. For the personnel inside the German armor, it felt akin to being ensnared in a tightening net. The Sherman had evolved from being perceived as a feeble adversary. It had become an integral component of a mechanism engineered to dismantle even the most formidable Panzer divisions. The cumulative impact of this was profoundly damaging to German morale. They had taken pride in their expertise in armored warfare, the blitzkrieg that had once advanced unchallenged. However, now, in the face of American forces, they confronted a system that transformed their own advantages into vulnerabilities. Heavy armor turned into a disadvantage in constricted pathways. Long barrels lost their effectiveness when ambushed from the rear, and morale disintegrated when encircled by waves of Shermans supported by relentless tank destroyers. The illusion of invincibility, meticulously cultivated over years of conflict, was obliterated under the synchronized offensive of American armor and anti-tank innovation. Among the most haunting recollections for German tank crews were the abrupt and brutal ambushes that obliterated entire armored columns in mere moments. These confrontations, frequently occurring in the French countryside or the wooded paths of Belgium, became legendary not for the magnitude of the battles, but for the rapidity with which American anti-tank weaponry decimated forces that had previously been deemed unstoppable. For the Germans, this represented not merely a military setback, but a profound humiliation, a stark reminder that even their most formidable machines were susceptible when ensnared in the right trap. An account from northern France during the autumn of 1944 recounted how a German column consisting of Panthers and Panzer Dyer attempted to navigate a narrow road in a village. The foremost tank was hit at close range by a bazooka team concealed within the debris of a collapsed building. As the crew fought to regain control, tank destroyers stationed on a ridge outside the town commenced firing. Within moments, the road was obstructed by burning wreckage. Survivors recounted the terror of being ensnared, unable to move forward or backward. Their vehicles were trapped as American gunners systematically eliminated them. The situation was exacerbated by the fact that the ambush was silent until it commenced. There was no preliminary artillery bombardment, no tank confrontation across open fields, only the abrupt eruption of gunfire from men and machines that had been undetectable moments earlier. In Belgium, another German unit advancing through thick forest became the target of a coordinated ambush that integrated bazooka squads with the agile M18 Hellcats. As panzers cautiously advanced, bazooka teams incapacitated the rear vehicles, cutting off any chance of escape. Subsequently, Hellcats emerged from hidden positions, racing along concealed paths and attacking from the flanks. Crews trapped in the middle of the column described the chaos as shells penetrated armor from unforeseen angles. A single ambush obliterated what had once been a formidable armored battalion, leaving twisted remains smoldering in the forest's dim light. Survivors deserted their vehicles, fleeing on foot through the woods, tormented by the realization that they had not even fired a single decisive shot in retaliation. These incidents were catastrophic for morale. Crews began to openly discuss how the Americans fought like hunters, while the Germans were relegated to the status of prey. The tales spread rapidly through the ranks. Men awaiting their turn to advance feared not the enemy tanks, but the hidden bazookas lurking in the shadows, or the Hellcats darting in from nowhere. Veterans recounted sleepless nights, attuned to every snap of a twig or the rumble of an engine, convinced that it could signal another ambush. The impact was cumulative. Each destroyed column deepened the belief that the battlefield was inherently rigged against them. Commanders attempted to adapt by ordering reconnaissance patrols to precede tank advances, insisting that infantry clear paths more thoroughly, and prohibiting movement through villages without extensive screening. However, the Americans adjusted just as swiftly, altering their ambush strategies and appearing in the most unexpected locations. To the German crews, it seemed as though the enemy could emerge from nowhere. The once formidable Panzer divisions, emblematic of shock and speed, now advanced cautiously, apprehensive of the unseen enemy lurking in the next hedgerow or grove of trees. The psychological burden of these ambushes far outweighed the physical losses. Crews that had previously entered battle with assurance began to question every order and maneuver. Diaries reflect a growing sense of despair. Tankers expressed feelings of doom even before the first shot was fired. For a generation of soldiers conditioned to believe that German technology and training rendered them superior, nothing was more devastating than the realization that they were being outmaneuvered not by superior tanks, but by cunning traps and weapons that exploited their vulnerabilities. These ambushes became the specters that haunted every Panzer crew, influencing their every decision, and serving as a reminder that, in the new warfare characterized by bazookas and tank destroyers, the hunters had transformed into the hunted. The winter of 1944 ushered in the Ardennes offensive, historically recognized as the Battle of the Bulge. For many German tank crews, it represented their final significant gamble, a desperate effort to divide the Allied lines and compel a negotiated peace. They advanced with confidence in their heavy armor, convinced that the snow-laden forests and narrow valleys of Belgium and Luxembourg would favor their surprise assault. Initially, the attack appeared to be successful. American forces retreated, with roads congested by fleeing convoys, while panzers once again broke through enemy lines. However, the crews were unprepared for the rapid response and adaptability of the Americans, nor for the devastating impact of bazookas and tank destroyers in halting their advance. The Ardennes presented a visibility nightmare. Fog, snow, and thick woods obscured movement until it was too late. German crews navigating narrow roads felt both secure and exposed, shielded from enemy aircraft yet unable to detect potential threats. Bazooka teams took full advantage of this situation. Concealed behind snowbanks or huddled in frozen farmhouses, they waited for tanks to pass before launching their attacks from behind at close range. Many German veterans later recounted the eerie silence preceding an ambush, the muffled crunch of snow, the heavy sound of engines, followed by the sudden explosion of a rocket striking steel. Crews, already chilled and fatigued, felt hunted in the very forests they thought would provide them cover. Even more frightening were the American tank destroyer units redeployed to the Ardennes. The M18 Hellcats, renowned for their speed, appeared unaffected by the snow and ice. They zipped along rural roads, encircling German armor trapped in traffic jams. The M36 Jacksons, equipped with 90mm guns, positioned themselves on ridges overlooking valleys where German tanks advanced in columns. At Saint-Vith and Bastogne, tank destroyers emerged at critical junctures, demolishing Panthers and Tigers with astonishing precision. Survivors described the terror of witnessing comrades' tanks erupt into flames under long-range fire, recognizing that even the formidable armor of a Tiger was not impervious in this frozen battleground. The Americans also utilized the terrain with ruthless efficiency. They established roadblocks at choke points, integrating mines, bazooka teams, and tank destroyers. German crews advancing through snowy villages found themselves channeled into narrow streets where concealed weapons struck from all sides. A Panzer officer expressed his bitterness following the battle, stating, "We anticipated engaging Shermans in open combat. Instead, we confronted phantoms in the forests, rockets lurking in the shadows, and artillery that obliterated our most formidable machines." The psychological impact during the Bulge was immense. Crews recounted sleepless nights within their frigid tanks, acutely aware that dawn could herald yet another ambush. The once mighty Panzer divisions, emblematic of shock and momentum, faltered under unyielding attrition. Even when they secured localized victories, the persistent harassment from bazookas and tank destroyers undermined their confidence. The Americans, frequently outnumbered at the outset, fought with a tenacity and resourcefulness that astonished the Germans. By January 1945, as the offensive unraveled, numerous tank crews privately confessed that they had lost faith not only in achieving victory, but also in the very machines they had once revered. The Battle of the Bulge served as the ultimate crushing reminder that the tide of war had shifted irreversibly. The surviving German crews carried with them vivid memories of forests teeming with unseen adversaries, of rockets striking from the snow, and of tank destroyers whose firepower pierced their armor as if it were mere paper. For those who once regarded their panzers as the pinnacle of battlefield supremacy, the Ardennes represented a harsh awakening. The Americans had perfected the art of tank destruction, signaling the end of German armored supremacy. By the war's final months, the dread of bazookas and tank destroyers had ingrained itself so profoundly in the psyche of German tank crews that it influenced every tactical decision they made in combat. What had initially been a technical threat evolved into a psychological scar that never fully healed. Crews that once boarded their panzers with a sense of invincibility now did so with trepidation, anxiously surveying every dilapidated house, every cluster of trees, and every snowbank along the roadside. The mere thought of an American infantryman crouched with a bazooka or a Hellcat suddenly materializing on their flank was sufficient to drain morale even before the first shot was fired. Veterans later reflected on the peculiar, unsettling anxiety that accompanied each movement. The constant hum of the engine, which had once provided comfort, transformed into a reminder that their vehicle was also a source of noise and exhaust, attracting hunters closer. At night, numerous crews confessed to their inability to sleep, as their imaginations filled the quiet with the sound of a rocket's hiss or the roar of a 90mm gun. Even in the absence of an enemy, shadows appeared to be alive with peril. In certain instances, crews deserted their tanks at the mere whisper of bazooka teams lying in wait ahead, opting for the disgrace of retreat rather than the horror of being incinerated within a burning panzer. The psychological weight intensified as the war continued. Letters and diaries disclosed that tankers likened themselves to cattle herded into a slaughterhouse, unable to dispel the belief that every mission was a death warrant. A veteran from the Eastern Front admitted that Soviet artillery barges and T-34 assaults had never unsettled him as much as American ambush strategies did in the West. The distinction lay in the intimacy of the threat. When facing artillery or enemy tanks, destruction felt like an integral part of the grand conflict of armies. However, against bazookas, a panzer could be annihilated by a single individual concealed just a few meters away, unseen and unchallenged until it was too late. German officers acknowledged the erosion of confidence and attempted to combat it with discipline and propaganda. They reminded crews of their victories and their alleged superiority in engineering. Nevertheless, these reassurances felt empty after enduring too many defeats at the hands of concealed rocket teams or rapid tank destroyers. Crews murmured among themselves that the Americans had discovered a method to render every advance fatal. Some even reported instances of panic spreading through units upon hearing the crack of a bazooka. It was not unusual for entire columns to come to a standstill, uncertain whether to advance or retreat, their previously feared momentum shattered by unseen hunters. The anxiety extended beyond the battlefield. Even in rest areas distant from the front lines, tankers were unable to escape their memories. Veterans recalled nightmares of their tanks bursting into flames, with comrades screaming inside as the steel coffin became their final resting place. The conclusion of the war did not bring relief for many. The sound of fireworks or engines many years later could evoke memories of those lethal ambushes. Psychologically, the bazooka and the tank destroyer had etched themselves into the minds of German soldiers as symbols of dread and inevitability. Perhaps most revealing is how these weapons transformed the very identity of the Panzer crews. Once the epitome of German strength and pride, they concluded the war as men haunted by shadows, stripped of the invincibility that had once propelled them through earlier campaigns. The Americans not only obliterated their tanks, but they also dismantled their confidence, spirit, and faith in the machine that had previously served as their shield. In the final analysis, the psychological impact of bazookas and tank destroyers may have been as crucial as the physical devastation they caused. When the guns finally ceased fire in 1945, the German veterans who survived their service within Panzers carried with them memories of shock, humiliation, and awe at the American weaponry that had undone them. In the subsequent years, as they reflected in memoirs and post-war interviews, a recurring theme emerged. The bazooka and the tank destroyer had irrevocably altered armored warfare. These were not merely instruments of battle, but tools that redefined the rules of tank usage, compelling even the proud Panzer divisions to recognize their vulnerability. In occupied Germany, as defeated crews conversed with Allied interrogators, they frequently acknowledged that it was not solely the Sherman tank that disrupted their momentum, but the combined effect of American anti-tank weaponry. One former Panther commander noted that his greatest fear had not been enemy armor, but rather the solitary soldier with a rocket who could appear unexpectedly. Another individual recalled the M36 Jackson as the genuine tiger killer, a vehicle whose 90mm gun compelled them to relinquish even their most fortified positions. These admissions disclosed a reluctant respect, even admiration, for the resourcefulness of the Americans who had previously been regarded as inexperienced and mechanically inferior. The impact of these encounters resonated not only in German recollections, but also in post-war military doctrine worldwide. The principle that infantry should always be armed with portable anti-tank weapons became a standard practice, motivated by the bazooka's success on the battlefield. Similarly, the American strategy of mobile tank destroyers shaped NATO tactics during the Cold War, demonstrating that speed and firepower could frequently surpass mere armor thickness. German veterans, many of whom later participated in the newly established Bundeswehr, acknowledged that their training integrated lessons learned the hard way in Normandy, the Ardennes, and the forests of Belgium. However, beyond tactics and doctrine, the psychological impact lingered for decades afterward. Memoirs from Panzer crews depicted recurring nightmares: the abrupt explosion of a rocket, the thunder of a 90mm gun, and the despair of being ensnared in searing steel. These recollections were often shared with resentment, the humiliation of being vanquished by weapons that were so simple, so seemingly rudimentary, yet devastatingly effective. Concurrently, there was a certain unwilling admiration for the Americans' capacity to merge mass production, innovative design, and relentless coordination into a war machine that wore down even Germany's elite forces. Historians later noted that the bazooka and the tank destroyers represented a broader reality, that the war was no longer determined solely by the most formidable machines, but by systems, integration, and adaptability. The German tank crews, who had once epitomized the blitzkrieg spirit, found themselves overwhelmed not only by numbers, but by a style of warfare that exploited their vulnerabilities with merciless precision. The illusion of invincible armor was dismantled, giving way to a new reality where no tank could proceed without the dread of abrupt annihilation. For the soldiers who had served in panzers, this understanding left enduring scars that persisted beyond the war. Some chose silence, burying their memories alongside their fallen comrades. Others documented their experiences, cautioning future generations of soldiers that valor and technology held little significance if the adversary exhibited creativity and determination. Most importantly, they recognized that the Americans, armed with their bazookas and tank destroyers, had removed the sense of invulnerability that once enveloped the Panzer divisions. This was a humbling legacy, one that guaranteed that the narrative of German armor during the Second World War could never again be recounted without the looming presence of those small, lethal weapons that astonished even the most seasoned crews.